Imagine a time of uncertainty and mysteries. The people of Israel, separated from their land, live in the midst of sadness and longing, trying to understand the reason for so much suffering and what the future holds for them. It is in this dark context that the prophet Ezekiel appears, a man chosen by God to carry a message that would span centuries, speaking of things that have not yet happened, but that would forever change the destiny of Israel and perhaps the world. Ezekiel begins to receive intense visions, images that no one else could see. He sees scenes of battle, threats, and a powerful leader named Gog, a mysterious character who appears to lead an invasion of northern Israel. Who is Gog? Where does he come from? Why does he turn against Israel? These are questions that leave everyone intrigued. Ezekiel's vision is more than a warning. It is a glimpse of what is to come, of a time known as the last days or end times. These are visions that show a war that goes far beyond territorial disputes, but which has profound spiritual implications. Gog is not just a leader. He represents forces of opposition to God and his people. Gog's attack on Israel appears to be part of a larger plan, an apocalyptic event that challenges the very peace and stability of the land. In this video, we will walk side by side with Ezekiel as he tries to unravel the mysteries around him. Let's try to understand who this enigmatic Gog is and what these prophecies have to tell us about the future of Israel and the world. Imagine the people of Israel torn from their own land, from their homes, from everything they knew and loved. They were a people who carried a special covenant with God, and their land was not just any place, but the promised land, the land of their ancestors. But then everything changed. The Babylonian army, under the command of the powerful king Nebuchadnezzar, invaded Jerusalem with overwhelming force. The walls were destroyed, the temple, Israel's holiest site, where they believed God dwelt among them, was looted and burned. It was as if Israel's heart had been ripped out. Nebuchadnezzar not only invaded Jerusalem, he took with him the elite of the people, including priests, rulers, and the best artisans, forcing them to live as captives in a foreign land, Babylon. The Israelites were now far from their home, their identity, and their freedom. They were forced to live under the culture and rules of another people, worshiping other gods, speaking another language, feeling the weight of longing and uncertainty about the future. They wondered if they would ever return to their homeland, or if they would be forgotten forever. And it was in this dark context that Ezekiel emerged. He wasn't just any man. Ezekiel was a priest, someone who served God with devotion. But now, exiled along with his people, he was also someone who felt the weight of that tragedy, the pain of seeing his people and his land destroyed. He was a man who understood the suffering around him, and perhaps that is why God chose Ezekiel to be the voice of hope and comfort that the people so needed. Ezekiel, while away from his land and his temple, began to have extraordinary visions. God spoke to him in an intense and impressive way, revealing to him not only the reason for all the devastation, but also a glimpse of what the future held. These visions were like windows to a world beyond, a world where the power and glory of God were always present, even if invisible to the eyes of the people in that moment of anguish. God gave Ezekiel a clear mission. He was to be the voice that would remind the people that God had not abandoned them. Even in exile, even far from the promised land, God was still with them, and he had plans to restore them. Ezekiel had to explain that the suffering they experienced was not the end, but rather part of a process that would lead the people back to their faith in God's promises. Ezekiel, with a firm voice and an intense gaze, begins to reveal a vision that captures everyone's attention. He speaks of a terrible invasion to come, an event that would shake Israel and the world. In his visions, Ezekiel sees a fierce leader named Gog. This name resonates like thunder in the prophecies, as Gog is described as an aggressive man, driven by evil intentions and determined to invade Israel with relentless force. He does not come alone, but at the head of a powerful army, with men prepared for war and armed to the teeth. Ezekiel describes Israel, the target of Gog's attack, as a peaceful land inhabited by peaceful people. It is a land without walls, without defenses. The people of Israel live with confidence, without expecting an invasion, without imagining the size of the approaching danger. They are vulnerable, and it is exactly this tranquility that seems to attract Magog's leader. But who is this Gog, and what is Magog? Gog is identified as a leader, but a leader of a land whose exact location is not known. Magog may be somewhere in northern Israel, but the Bible doesn't tell us exactly where. This gives rise to many theories and interpretations. Some people believe that Magog could represent a coalition of nations, a union of countries that share a common goal, attacking Israel. Other speculation suggests that Magog is related to specific nations, but over the centuries this has remained a mystery. Ezekiel's vision shows Gog being driven by thoughts of conquest, perhaps driven by envy or the desire to expand his domain. He sees Israel as easy prey, a carefree nation, living in peace, and decides he will attack it. Gog then calls for an alliance of nations, joining forces with other lands that share his hostility toward Israel. This covenant forms like a rapidly approaching storm, covering the sky and bringing darkness to the peaceful land of Israel. It is a vision of tension, of imminent conflict. What Ezekiel sees is not just a military invasion, but a battle between much larger forces trying to oppose God's own plan for Israel. Gog's invasion is therefore more than a physical attack. It is an attempt to defy the divine protection that has always been over Israel. Ezekiel's description is intense, as if he were watching the soldiers march, hearing the sound of weapons, feeling the ground shake as Gog's army advanced. It is a scene of war, of danger, but also of something that is beyond human understanding. Ezekiel observes and reports the vision in detail, so that everyone can understand the gravity of this event and what it represents for Israel and the world. Ezekiel's vision deepens, revealing that Gog does not come alone. On the contrary, he brings together a powerful coalition of nations at his side, a military alliance made up of distant countries that come together with a single purpose: to attack Israel. Among Gog's allies, Ezekiel mentions names that resonate with strength in history: Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya. These nations are not Israel's neighbors, which shows that Gog is capable of attracting allies from faraway lands, united by a dark goal. Persia, which is now known as Iran, was a vast and powerful empire, with great armies and resources. Ethiopia, south of Egypt, and Libya, west of Israel, joined forces, representing the commitment of this alliance to attack Israel from all sides, as if they wanted to surround the nation chosen by God. These nations come together for a common cause, something that makes them put aside their own rivalries and differences in the name of a greater plan. It is as if they are being drawn by an irresistible force, a collective impulse to rise up against Israel. This union of nations in a geopolitical coalition represents an attack of epic proportions, something that Israel, on its own, could never face. It is an imminent threat that seems inevitable, a scenario in which powerful and hostile forces prepare to attack a small and vulnerable people. The plan of Gog and his alliance is not simply to destroy Israel, but it is as if they are trying to defy God himself, trying to subvert the divine plan of protection and restoration for his people. However, this vision of attack does not end in the destruction of Israel. Ezekiel makes it clear that this great uprising will be followed by divine intervention. God watches everything, and he will not leave his people helpless. The coalition of nations, in all its strength and organization, represents direct opposition to God's plan, and this imminent attack will be the setting where God's glory and power will be manifested. Gog and his alliance don't know it, but they are about to encounter something far beyond what their weapons and armies can face. Ezekiel takes us deeper into the vision, describing the mighty military strength of God. This leader is not content with just putting together a coalition. He organizes an immense army, well-equipped and prepared for war. The scenery that Ezekiel sees is imposing. Endless rows of soldiers, all mounted on strong and fast horses, ready for battle. The vision is full of detail. Each soldier is equipped with armor, shields, and spears, and everyone is organized and disciplined, like an irresistible war machine. This army is a display of brute force, a terrifying threat that advances like a storm. Gog's military strength is so great that it seems overwhelming, an army designed to plunder, destroy, and subjugate. But Gog's motivation goes beyond simple territorial gains or conquering new wealth. He is not just after Israel's gold, silver, or resources. His desire is deeper, rooted in ancient hostility and deep hatred. Gog sees in Israel something that bothers him, something that challenges him. His motivation is like a flame fueled by historical resentments, by a desire to crush God's chosen people and demonstrate his own superiority. Israel, in Gog's eyes, represents a spiritual and cultural resistance that he cannot tolerate. For him, Israel is not just a country, but a symbol of God's commitment to a people. The very existence of Israel is a constant reminder of the power and divine protection that these people carry, something that deeply angers Gog and those who share his hatred. It is as if God was trying to defy God himself by attacking Israel. He wants more than land and riches. He wants to see God's people defeated, humiliated, and reduced to nothing. And with this goal in mind, he gathers his vast military force, prepared to launch himself against a land he believes to be defenseless, trusting in his numerical advantage and destructive capacity. Gog's motivation is, therefore, a reflection of a rebellion against the covenant that God has with Israel. Their warfare is both physical and spiritual, an attempt to subvert the promise of divine protection. But as Ezekiel makes clear, this motivation and this military strength will inevitably encounter the justice of God, who promises to protect his people against this seemingly invincible threat. Amidst the vision of the approaching devastating attack, Ezekiel reveals something even more impressive: God's direct intervention. When all seems lost for Israel and Gog's military might threatens to destroy every inch of that peaceful land, God rises to the defense of his people, showing that he is Israel's true protector. What God did not expect is that by defying Israel, he was defying God himself, and this would have dire consequences. Ezekiel describes how God will respond to this invasion with full force, through powerful manifestations of nature, catastrophes so great that they will shake the very ground. First, an earthquake of immense proportions shakes the earth. This earthquake doesn't just affect the invaders. It reverberates throughout the region, reminding everyone that God's hand is at work. Israel's enemies, who came confident in their strength, now face something that their swords, horses, and shields cannot stop. They are forced to realize that they are in a much greater fight than they anticipated, a fight against the Creator of all things. In addition to the earthquake, violent storms ravage Gog's army. Lightning cuts the sky. Thunder echoes as if it were a declaration of war from God himself against those who dared to attack his people. Torrential rain and hail fall heavily, creating chaos within the enemy ranks. The strength and organization that seemed unbeatable begin to disintegrate in the face of the elements of nature, controlled by God. Ezekiel notes how these signs are not mere natural forces. They are the visible expression of God's power and justice. Fire and brimstone are also part of divine judgment, destroying everything in its path, making it impossible for the invading army to advance. It is as if every element of creation is participating in this battle, becoming an instrument of divine wrath. God's sovereignty is clear and indisputable. He does not need a human army to defend Israel. He uses his own creation to show that all nations and all leaders are under his command. Gog and his alliance, who believed they could overcome divine protection, now face a force that is beyond any human understanding. As Ezekiel continues to describe the events of Gog's invasion, many modern scholars begin to draw parallels between these prophecies and the period known as the 7-year tribulation, a time of global distress and conflict that, according to scriptures, will mark the beginning of the last days. It is a period where the world faces intense challenges and judgments, and where dark forces seek to deceive and oppress humanity. At the center of many of these events, the prophecies say, will be a figure known as the Antichrist. According to these interpretations, the Antichrist emerges as a charismatic world leader and strategist, someone who possesses unprecedented influence. He offers solutions to complex global problems, earning the trust of nations, and especially Israel. Many scholars suggest that as part of his strategy, he will enter into a peace treaty with Israel, promising security and stability. This agreement, which will initially seem like the answer to Israel's problems, paves the way for a sense of peace and confidence among the people, who perhaps believe they are finally safe from any external threat. But this security will be brief. This treaty may, in fact, be a carefully planned trap to weaken Israel's defenses, making it vulnerable to the attack led by Gog. In a move of betrayal, the Antichrist could then break the treaty, revealing his true intentions and creating the conditions for Gog's prophesied invasion to occur. In this way, the Antichrist and Gog may be linked, both as figures who challenge divine authority and seek to subjugate God's people. This connection between Gog, the tribulation, and the Antichrist paints a bleak picture, but it also reminds us that these events are under divine control. The presence of the Antichrist and the invasion of Gog may seem like the height of evil and oppression, but in reality, they only set the stage for an even greater divine intervention, where God will display his power and faithfulness in impressive ways. In the midst of so many visions of war, destruction, and judgment, God reveals to Ezekiel something profoundly beautiful and full of hope: the promise of restoration for Israel. This promise is marked by a powerful and memorable vision that Ezekiel receives: the vision of a valley filled with dry bones. These bones are scattered across the ground, dry and lifeless, a clear representation of the spiritual and physical state of Israel after so many years of exile, suffering, and separation from the Promised Land. Israel seemed like a hopeless nation, a scattered and desolate people. But then, God instructs Ezekiel to prophesy about those bones. And as Ezekiel obeys and prophesies, something miraculous happens. The bones begin to move, tendons and flesh form on them, and soon they are covered with skin. However, even physically restored, they lack something essential: the breath of life. God then commands Ezekiel to prophesy to the wind, and the breath of God enters these restored bodies, bringing them to life as a vast and powerful army. This vision symbolizes more than a simple physical resurrection. It is a spiritual rebirth. It heralds the future of Israel as a restored, united, and vital nation. God not only promises to bring the people back to their land, but he also promises to heal their hearts, restore their faith, and revive their spirit. The vision of the dry bones makes it clear that God has not forgotten his people and that his covenant remains, even after times of disobedience and separation. This promise of restoration points to Israel's central role in the last days. Israel will be more than a rebuilt nation. It will be a living testimony of God's faithfulness and power. In the final days, God's glory will be manifested through Israel, a nation that was scattered and destitute, but will be reunited and restored by divine hand. The whole world will see that God is faithful to his promises, that he keeps his word, and that he has a plan for the redemption of not just Israel, but all humanity. Thus, Israel will not just be a people. It will be the symbol of God's commitment to those he loves. In the last days, Israel will rise as a renewed nation, a testimony to God's restorative power, and the world will see that divine promise never fails. The Valley of Dry Bones is not just a story of desolation and hope. It is an eternal reminder that when God promises life, not even death can stop his plan.